Welcome, everybody. So happy to see a full house. This is amazing. It's awesome. Yay. Bret, you have a good pull here.
Apparently. I think the pizza had a lot more pull than I had.
Well, it is pretty delicious pizza. That I have to agree with you. So we love Bret. Bret is a longtime mentor. He's going to introduce himself more broadly, but I'm going to talk about him in relation to Miller Center. So for those of you who don't know, Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship is a social enterprise accelerator. We've accelerated more than 1,400 global companies from 100 countries around the world. And we do that through our amazing volunteer mentors, of which there are about 370, most of them from around here in Silicon Valley, but also around the world. And if you're interested in learning more about Miller Center, if you're a student or a visitor or whatever, please come and talk to me or any of the other staff members afterwards. But meanwhile, Bret. Let's talk about Bret. Bret is amazing, and we looked up a few facts. So, Bret has been...
Are these actual facts or alternative facts?
These are true facts. These are true facts. Mentoring for 15 years, but not since 2009. But not only that, he has mentored at least one social enterprise, often two, every single year since 2009, for a grand total of 24 enterprises. Check it out. The enterprises that Bret has mentored have grown their impact by 6.5 million lives within 3 years of graduating from Berkeley. So that's like 6.5 million lives you've had an impact on. Pretty impressive. And raised $59 million post-accelerator.
I don't know where that is.
You're pretty good at it. Yeah. So these are the facts that I wanted to leave you with. So this is a guy who really knows what he's talking about when it comes to entrepreneurship, and definitely when it comes to social entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship writ large. And we are so excited to learn more about the Launchpad.
Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah.
Okay, so who here has a startup idea? Okay, perfect. I can almost guarantee you your startup idea is going to fail. Any questions so far? All right, so I'm Bret Waters, as Bridget said. I've been in Silicon Valley my whole life. I grew up in Los Gatos. Those of you who know where that is, just a few miles that way. And I now live up near Stanford, so I've literally been here my whole life. I've done the serial entrepreneur thing of founding a couple companies, being a CEO, raising capital, and eventually managing a sale of the company, sometimes under pleasant circumstances, sometimes under less pleasant circumstances, because that's pretty much the life of an entrepreneur, right? So, you know what, before I forget, we need a photo, okay? Everybody put your arms in the air. Everybody say, pizza is awesome.
Pizza is awesome.
All right.
Not as awesome as tacos.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, Bridget.
Come on.
I'm
really yes.
Okay, so, I have, as I said, I've lived in Silicon Valley my whole life. I've been pretty immersed in the whole world of entrepreneurship and innovation and venture capital. And through my work teaching entrepreneurship at Stanford and my years working with entrepreneurs at Miller Center, I've literally worked with hundreds of startup founders. And so, I've seen patterns with regard to which ones succeed and which ones fail, right? I also, in the last few years, I kind of feel as if Silicon Valley devolved into a cult of fundraising. And I kind of think we need to get back to just being a cult of building great businesses. And so all of those things combined are kind of what prompted me to write this book. And the book is more or less the content for a course that I've been teaching at Stanford for several years, and so I've had a chance to kind of slowly refine it and expand it and such. And it's based, many of you probably are familiar with kind of the standard Silicon Valley startup canon, right? That in 2005, Steve Blank wrote a book that kind of changed everything and established the current kind of agile methodology that startups use today. A few years later, Eric Ries pretty much took everything in Steve's book and packaged it in a more popular, easier to digest format, the lean startup. And just to dispel a myth right off the bat, a lot of people think the title of the lean startup means how to run a startup on the cheap, right? And if you actually read the book, that's not what it is at all. If you read the book, he says that it's based on the Toyota lean manufacturing system, that Toyota completely changed the auto industry in the 1970s by introducing this, what they call the lean manufacturing system, which has to do with short production runs and more rapid iterations. And so the book is about applying the Toyota manufacturing system, lean manufacturing system, to startup methodology. It's nothing to do with running a startup on the cheap. And he popularizes the idea of an MVP, a minimum viable product, which, these days you walk into, any coffee shop in Silicon Valley, you'll find people talking about their MVP, right? They're like, as soon as my MVP's done, I'm going to raise a lot of money. And then the business model canvas, which many of you probably been exposed to. And so this is kind of the canon that's been used for startup methodology in Silicon Valley for a bunch of years. I've taught it myself. It's been used to build some great companies. But there's a couple of holes in it, in particular financial modeling and competitive landscape. And it's also, it's 20 years old at this point. And so part of my goal with developing the launch path was to take the existing stuff and update it a little bit and fill in some holes. And so that's what it is. It's 12 steps to get from a startup idea to a launch-ready venture. And so I thought what I'd do is I'll just kind of run through the steps in the book and offer a few thoughts here and there, and then we can just kind of organically talk about whatever you guys would like to talk about. Step one, I call listen to the waves, which is really, where do great startups begin? Where do great startup ideas come from? And there's this mythology that all you have to do is come up with a great startup idea by Tuesday, and you'll be a tech billionaire by Saturday, right? And the reality, of course, is, first of all, it's a lot harder than that. Secondly, more often than not, the original idea fails. And it turns out that what really matters, of course, is not the idea, it's the execution, right? That ideas are cheap, execution is hard. And here are some lists of startups where the idea completely failed and they still turned it into $1 billion company. So YouTube thought their original main use case was going to be video dating. Turns out that wasn't the use case at all, right? Instagram, many of you know this, Instagram launched as an app called Bourbon. It was a mobile check-in app to compete with Foursquare, and it utterly failed. And one night they were looking at the usage logs, and they're like, this app has just totally failed. But look, the only features anybody's using, all these features we developed, the only features you'd be using is take a picture, apply a filter, and share it. So I thought, well, maybe we'll strip out all the other features. We'll just keep take a picture, apply a filter, and share it, and we'll rename it Instagram and see what happens. The Twitter team started off making a podcasting platform. Slack was originally a video game studio that completely failed. And as they were packing up their boxes to go home, somebody said, hey, there's this internal platform we built for real-time collaboration between engineers building video games. Maybe that could be something. That's where Slack began. And there's many, many other examples. And so, again, the point is here that it's, even though there's this mythology that startup success is all about having a great idea, there's actually very little evidence that, historical evidence that it's the idea that matters. And in fact, if you look at successful startups, more often than not, they begin with a founder who notices a problem worth solving. So the Uber guys spent money to hire a private car, and they heard the driver talking about how much downtime he had every day waiting for somebody else to need a private car. Airbnb, of course, began with 3 guys in San Francisco who had an extra bedroom and needed some money to pay the rent. And Cisco was started by Sandy Lerner, who was a computer administrator at Stanford who was frustrated by the slow network speeds. And so she started a company called Cisco, which is now worth $60 billion. And so, I love this quote from Paul Graham, the co-founder of Y Combinator, where he says that, the way to think up startup ideas is not to think of the verb as being think up, but instead notice. That most great startups begin with a founder who notices a problem worth solving. And this, of course, dovetails pretty damn well into the work the Miller Center does, right? In that, for the most part, every social enterprise begins with a founder who notices a problem worth solving. Step 2, learn what people want. So we have all seen so many examples of companies that have launched their exciting new product that they think the world is going to love, only to find out that nobody cares, right? We see this over and over again. We see startups that fail because they launched something that nobody really cared that much about. And we've seen existing companies, big existing companies, do the same thing, right? Spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a new product that they think the world is going to love, and the thing is a total flop. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I've done it myself. So in 1999, I raised a $5 million first round of capital to build just absolutely awesome idea that I had for a software product. And I used that money to go out and hire a bunch of expensive software engineers, had them drink the Kool-Aid, and they were totally convinced that indeed my idea was awesome. And we spent 2 years and $5 million building our awesome product, only to find out that, nobody wanted it. And so I learned, one of the important things I learned during that chapter of my life was, I should have taken that money, put most of it in the bank, and then spent 6 months just out talking to customers, right? And so I've become very passionate about this idea of before you do product development, do customer development. Just get out there and talk to customers. Now, many of you probably have been exposed to the design thinking framework. And it's kind of, start by empathizing with the customer or the user, kind of really understand their life and their world, define a point of view, brainstorm about how you can solve the problems that they have, and then prototype and test, prototype and test, prototype and test, right? So design thinking process been around for a while, but kind of on either end of that, there's two concepts. One is the concept that Steve Blank developed called customer development, which again means before you do product development, do customer development. Which doesn't have to be super formal. It can just be going out and meeting with 50 different people who kind of represent typical customers that you would like to solve and chatting with them. Don't meet with them and sell them on your awesome startup idea. That's not the point, right? If you want words of affirmation, get those from your mom. The point of the meeting is to have conversations with them that helps you to empathize, helps you to understand their life and their point of view. And end up with hidden insights, right? What you're looking for is not to confirm what you already believe. What you're looking for is hidden insights that hadn't even occurred to you. So that's the customer development part. And then the design thinking process ends with prototype and test, prototype and test. And that's basically MVP, right? Minimum viable product. And the big mistake that most people do is they think that MVP is kind of a thing that you do once, and then you're like, we did our MVP, now we move on. Instead, you're much better off thinking of the MVP as being a process. You should always be testing the next version of your product, exposing it to people, seeing how they react to it, et cetera, right? Big companies do this all the time. Google is constantly, releasing some new little set of features to a small group of people, see how they react to them, and then decide whether or not to officially release those features or not, right? So don't think of the MVP as a thing. Think of the MVP as a process. And a process designed for learning, right? That's the purpose of an MVP. So mediocre entrepreneurs build an MVP to show something. Great entrepreneurs build an MVP to learn something. So again, in coffee shops, you hear people say, as soon as my MVP is done, I'll be able to show it around and get a lot of money. The purpose is not to show, the purpose is to learn. The purpose is to get the MVP out into the hands of actual people in the field and learn from watching them use it. Draw the landscape. So every venture is going to operate within a landscape of competitors and alternatives, right? It's the alternatives part that's really important. Many people make their list of competitors, and all it is the direct competitors that they think are doing something like them. But there are always alternative ways of solving the problem that you solve, right? So if you're a spreadsheet company, you got all the other spreadsheet companies, but your other competition is just people, using paper and pencil, right? So, so it's a landscape of competitors and alternatives, alternative ways of solving the problem that your particular startup solves. So here's a very typical kind of slide you see in a pitch deck, right? It's a feature checklist. So here's our awesome new app, and look how much better it is than our competition, right? Because we've got features that they don't. You see this all the time in pitch decks, right? So what's wrong with this? What's the fundamental flaw in this?
Doesn't say what they do better than us.
Yeah. Or to put it another way, the underlying assumption here is that the product with the most features wins.
Yeah. We want all those features.
Yeah. Does the product with the most features always win? No. In fact, it's often the other way around, right? It's often a product with fewer features that ends up winning. So the underlying assumption with putting a feature checklist in there as your competitive landscape is that more features means you're going to win, and that's never the case, right? So this says nothing about how we actually fit into the existing landscape of competitors and alternatives. How about this? Is this useful? So, what I like to do is instead do some sort of a two-dimensional visualization of the landscape of competitors and alternatives and kind of how we fit into that landscape. So this is a fictional one about Zoom. This axis here is the extent to which it's focused on one-to-one calls versus big, huge group calls. And this axis here is the extent to which the video conference solution has enterprise integration. So in other words, does it integrate with Outlook and all the things that big enterprises use, right? So something like FaceTime, it's really built for one-to-one calls, not built for big group calls. And it has like no enterprise integration, right? There's no way to get FaceTime integrated with your Outlook calendar. And then at the other end of the scale are things like WebEx and Avaya. And here's where Zoom kind of fits in within that landscape. So again, don't create a feature checklist and then claim that that's your competitive positioning, because it's not. It's a stupid feature checklist that's supposed to make us want to buy your Frog watch instead of a Rolex. So after you do your competitive research, after you do your research on competitors and alternatives and create a nice kind of idea of how we fit into that, then stop focusing on competition. Then I think the mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make is they get too obsessed with competition. And I love this tweet from Paul Graham, again, the co-founder of Y Combinator. It says that failing to execute is a much bigger danger than being copied. So it's a mistake to focus on the former at the risk.
I'm more interested in the fact that he wrote that at 4 a.m. He just woke up at 4 a.m. and had to say that.
Well, he lives in London, so that might explain it. Yeah. So don't assess with competition, because that's not usually what kills startups. It's not that often. Out of all the things that kill startups, competition is not usually one of them. Design an engine of growth. So you get into the business model, right? In my definition of a business model, a business model is the rationale by which an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. So we create value by solving a problem that customers have, right? Now we have to deliver that value to them through our website or through our mobile app or through our retail stores or through our reseller channel, right? We have to have some way of delivering that value to them. And then we capture that value in the form of profits. So a business model is the rationale by which an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. And many of you have probably been exposed to the business model canvas. It's been around for a long time. How many of you have been exposed to the business model canvas? Yeah. So, and it's great. When I first started working with it, I was kind of skeptical. And then I realized that what I liked about it was, first of all, it helps to make sure that you're thinking through all the things you need to think through, right? Because for us as startup founders, we're really down in the weeds, and we're so excited about our algorithm. This is the most amazing algorithm, right? And we might not think of all the other things that are going to happen for our business model to fly. And then the other thing I like about it is that the way any investor is going to look at a startup is, where is the risk, right? And for different startups, the risk is in different places. For some startups, the risk is on the market side. Would anybody buy this? For other startups, the risk is on the product side. Could this thing actually be built, right? For other startups, the risk is on the economic side, right? Could we actually gain the efficiencies that we would need to gain in order to sell this at that price? So the risk is in different places for different startups. That's the way an investor is going to look at your deal. And that's the way you should be looking at it too, right? Even if you're not going to raise any outside money, you still should be thinking to yourself, where is the risk here? And to me, the business model canvas is kind of a nice way of visualizing all the things that are going to have to work, so you can kind of identify where is the risk. But of course, I wasn't happy with the standard business model canvas, so I developed my own. And it has many of the same things on it, plus a few additional things. And my Launchpath canvas, of course, correlates to the book, that everything, it matches up with the book and all the various steps in the book. Okay, spreadsheets. Who here loves spreadsheets? Yeah, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. So the numbers are obviously going to have to work. And, you know, I like, for an early stage startup, I like to not call these financial statements or even call them financial forecasts or anything like that. I like to simply say an economic model, because we don't yet know what revenue in year 3 is going to be, right? This is a startup. So, you know, putting together, you know, projections is kind of, for an early stage company, it's a waste of time. And they're not financial statements, because financial statements are backward-looking documents, right? Financial statements are what happened last year for the sake of taxes and reporting, right? So instead, I like to call it, at this stage, I call it an economic model. How would the basic economics of our venture work out? Again, our business model is the rationale by which our organization is going to create, deliver, and capture value. And so what do the numbers around that look like? And ultimately, every venture of every kind distills down to just one simple formula, which is customer acquisition cost against lifetime value of a customer. So, you know, we're doing a bunch of sales and marketing effort to get customers, right? And then once we get customers, we're hopefully making some money from them, right? So it seems self-evident that for this to work, we have to be able to get customers at a cost less than we can make from them, right? It seems obvious. And yet, this remains a leading cause of startup death, is realizing too late that you're paying $48 for every new customer that you get, and you're only making 24 bucks from them, right? It's a leading cause of startup death. And so the earlier you can kind of create a model around that and what that might look like and where the levers are, the better off you're going to be. And of course, I include with the book a complete example economic model for a new venture with a whole bunch of tabs and things. Okay, we might need to raise some capital, right? The main message here in the book, and that I'd like to deliver to you today, is that it's very easy for us here in Silicon Valley, because we're kind of immersed in the whole startup world, right? And so when we think startup financing, we immediately think of venture capital. That's what we do, right? You're like, I got a startup idea, it's awesome. I'm going to have to find somebody who's got an uncle on Sand Hill Road at a venture capital firm, right? And so what I try to do in the book is to open up the solution set in your mind. There are lots and lots of great ways to finance a startup venture. In fact, venture capital is a fit for a very, very small percentage of all startups. And so you really want to open up the solution set in your mind about the fact that there are many, many great ways to finance a startup venture, and pick the one that's right for you, right for your venture, and the one that, you know, best aligns your interests and the investor's interests. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters, is a financing structure where your interests as the founder and the investor's interests as investors are well aligned. Frame a funnel. So, you know, the number one cause of startup death still remains just simply not enough customers, right? And right behind that, as I said before, is getting customers, but finding out too late that your cost of getting customers exceeds what you can make from them. And so the earlier you can kind of begin testing that, begin to build a funnel. And the funnel metaphor, many of you already know this, is that you need 100 leads coming out into the top of the funnel in order to end up with, you know, 2 new customers coming out of the bottom of the funnel. And you got various things in there that are marketing and sales processes that help move somebody from being a lead to being a signed customer. And so many people make the mistake of saying, well, we're not going to have a product to ship for a year, and so we're certainly not going to spend any money on sales and marketing before we have a product to ship. And that's a huge mistake, because you can get your funnel built, you can start some early sales and marketing for ridiculously low amounts of money these days. Most of you could build a landing page, in about an hour and a half after breakfast. And you spend $50 on some social media ads or some Google search ads, start driving some traffic to your landing page, and see how many people arrive on your landing page and give you their email address to find out more, right? And if I spend $50 on ads, And I got 1,000 people clicked on the ad and came kind of in the top of my funnel and ended up on my landing page. And out of those, 10 people said, yeah, here's my email address, I'd love to know more. I've learned something about my conversion ratios, right? I've learned something about how much I'll probably need to spend in order to get people to come to my landing page and sign up. And so, you want to start that as early as you can, because in this funnel are a whole bunch of conversion points, right? We got 10,000 people come in the top, and of those, how many of those actually give us their email address? 3-4%, right? And of those, how many of them end up asking for more information? Yeah, another 3 or 4%. And of those, how many end up asking to see the full brochure? And of those, how many end up being customers, right? And you guys are all good with math. You know that if you could improve each one of those conversion points by just 2 or 3%, the yield at the bottom changes dramatically, right? And the only way to be able to do that kind of refinement and optimization is to have something up and running. So that's why I just think it's super important to be optimizing your funnel, building your funnel, optimizing your funnel long before you actually have a product to sell. Okay, be a master storyteller. So here's the thing. Every great entrepreneur has the ability to tell a crisp, clear, and compelling story about what she's working on and why it matters. It is just a fundamentally important skill for any entrepreneur to have, right? And we think of pitching as being a part of the fundraising process, right? We think, I gotta go pitch for some money. But the reality is that great entrepreneurs are pitching all day, every day, right? They're pitching for customers, they're pitching for partners, they're pitching to recruit employees, they're pitching the landlord on why they deserve a break in the rent next month. The great entrepreneurs are pitching all the time. You think about somebody like Steve Jobs, right? That a big part of his gift was that he could give a presentation and have everybody in the room going, "Oh my God, I want to buy one of those." It's a skill that every entrepreneur has to have, is that ability to tell a crisp, clear, and compelling story about what she's working on and why it matters. And one of the things I like to talk about is these, you guys know these Russian nesting dolls, right? So great entrepreneurs have, just naturally, they've got a 1-sentence version of their pitch, they've got a 1-minute version of their pitch, they've got a 3-minute version, they've got a 10-minute version, right? And they can do it on the fly depending on the situation, right? Great entrepreneurs they're just good at naturally doing that. I ran into a guy once, and he said he had a startup he was doing, and I said, "Cool, what's it all about?" And he took a sip of his drink and he said, "Well, there's a lot of grocery stores in the country." Yeah, okay. For grocery stores, their single biggest facilities expense is electricity for the cold storage, the refrigerators and freezers and stuff. Single biggest facilities expense, cold storage, okay? We make a device that cuts that cost in half. Boom, right? 3-sentence fragments, and I wanted to have a meeting. Now, what this thing actually was, it's an IoT device that goes inside of the grocery store refrigerators and freezers, monitors a bunch of operational data, broadcasts it up to the cloud. The cloud app does a bunch of math and broadcasts down instructions on how to optimize the electricity usage, right? But if I had said to this guy, "What are you working on?" If he had launched into a 15-minute treatise about his IoT-powered cloud paradigm-changing device for big data calculation in the cloud, right? And instead, he was like, "There's a lot of grocery stores in the country. Biggest facilities expense is cold storage. We make a device that cuts that cost in half." So again, storytelling, hugely important skill for any entrepreneur to have. Okay, so all of that rolls up onto the Launchpath canvas, and at the end of each chapter, I give examples for my awesome on-demand taco delivery company. I give examples of how you would complete the assignments at the end of each chapter and fill out your Launchpath canvas. And there's a complete filled out Launchpath canvas for my awesome on-demand healthy taco company. So there are 4 more chapters that are kind of a little more conceptual. One chapter is about the fact that when you look at the things that tend to drive startup success and failure, turns out the mindset of the founders is a huge thing, right? You hear about entrepreneurial mindset, but What does that mean? What does it mean to have an entrepreneurial mindset? And so I've got a whole chapter about that. That one was a fun one, because actually I called up a whole bunch of friends of mine who very successful people and said, what do you think an entrepreneurial mindset is? And I got a whole bunch of different answers. It was pretty interesting. Team, you've heard it said a million times before that the right team really is, all things being equal, the right team is what matters. Every venture capitalist will say that they will invest in an A quality team with a B quality idea any day of the week over a A quality idea with a B quality team. The team is what matters. And so I offer some thoughts on that in that chapter. And this one is Bridget's chapter. So in chapter 11, I talk about how can my Launchpath process be applied to social ventures and nonprofits. And the answer basically is I think probably 85 or 90% of it is the same, right? You still need to start with the problem we're solving. You still need a way of articulating that problem. You still need to get the product market fit, right? So most of everything, you still need an economic model, right? So 85% of the Launchpath applies just as well to social ventures as it does to for-profits. A couple differences. The sources and structures of capital for a social venture are usually different. You need a theory of change on top of a business model, so you kind of need a business model plus a theory of change, right? The distinction between earned income and contributed income. So contributed income is grants and donations, right? And earned income is, what do we actually earn from operations? And distinguishing between the two becomes an important part of the economic model, obviously, with these things. And then the personas. In other words, when you're thinking about the various personas within the ecosystem, with a social venture, often you got beneficiaries who aren't really the customers. You got somebody else as the customer, so those things get a little different. Let me quickly give credit to Andy and Karen, both of whom were very generous with their time in reviewing this chapter for me and giving me input on this chapter. And lastly, the last chapter that I chose to finish with is Operate with Integrity. And here's, and I'll close with this, and I'll close with, I'll close with a little story. So my first job ever was with a big printing company up in San Francisco, Pacific Lithograph. This is with Doug Ballinger's dad, Lynn. So I was 21 years old when I worked as a sales guy for this big printing company in San Francisco. These big, huge printing presses, filled an entire room. And my very first day on the job, the president of the company called me into his office and goes, "Hey, you're the new guy, get in here." So I went into his office and he goes, "Let me tell you something, kid. Here's what you got to know, is that the one thing that'll get you fired here is ever doing anything dishonest. Dishonest with a customer, dishonest with a vendor, dishonest with a colleague. Because here's what you got to know, kid, that there's some people out there going to say we're good quality printers. Some people are saying we're bad quality printers. I don't want anybody to ever say we're dishonest business people. Because a reputation for bad quality, you can work hard and overcome, right? But a reputation for dishonesty, you'll never overcome." Well, they're pretty wise words, and they made a really big impact on me as a 21-year-old. And those words have served me well in the years since. And so my parting thought to you guys is that, many of you have startup ideas of your own. You're going to pursue ventures and build great things. And as you do that, treat people with honesty, integrity, and transparency. It has served me well in my career, and I think it'll serve you well in yours. Wherever you go, just treat people with honesty, integrity, and transparency. Thanks, guys.
Nice.
First, I want to briefly touch on the move fast and break things. And actually say this in the book. I said that Silicon Valley's got kind of a bad rap for this move fast and break things. And I say change that to move fast and build things. And then I also tell the story of, there's a woman named Carol Bartz who was CEO of Autodesk, which was a very successful Silicon Valley company kind of a generation ago. And Carol developed what she called the fail fast forward methodology, which is that she wanted all of her employees to fail, because in the sense that you can't create innovation unless you're trying things that'll fail, right? But fail fast, right? and fail fast forward, meaning fail fast in a way that pushes the company forward. So we tried this, we learned something, and it pushes us forward, right? And so Carol Bartz's fail fast forward mantra ended up serving Autodesk very well, and I think becoming a much better way of thinking of Silicon Valley's philosophy of move fast and break things. Instead, think of it as fail fast forward. Now, what was your other question? It was about
the
capital. Yeah.
Strategy and like any example or.
Sure. So first, let's talk about the traditional venture capital model, right? That all those fancy buildings up on Sand Hill Road built on one simple model, which is that I'm going to buy stock in your company, so I'm buying equity in your company, and we're going to build this sucker to something really big, and then we're going to have an IPO, and then all that stock in your company that I bought is going to be worth $1 zillion at the IPO, right? That's the way the venture capital industry has always worked. And it's a high risk, high return model. So out of every 10 startups that they invest in, 8 or 9 fail and 1 makes it spectacularly, right? So it's basically, we're going to fire 10 rockets into the air, knowing that 9 of them will crash, but 1 is going to be hugely successful, right? That's what their model is based on. And that's been very successful for them, but it's not great for the 10 entrepreneurs who crashed, right? And it's a great fit. That model's a great fit if you're building an Uber or Airbnb where you just need a ton of capital in order. The purpose of venture capital basically is to be able to grow at an unnatural pace, right? Historically, companies have been grown at an organic pace, right? Meaning this quarter we made some profit, and so next quarter we'll reinvest that profit and grow the company further. And then we made some profit that quarter, and so we're going to reinvest it and grow the company further, right? That's the way companies were always built. And then venture capital came along, and it basically suddenly gave you a way to grow at an unnatural pace. And if you're building a marketplace like Airbnb or Uber, you kind of need to be able to grow at that unnatural pace because the marketplace doesn't work until you've got 1 million buyers and 1 million sellers, right? So for Airbnb to work, you got to have 1 million people with a place to rent and 1 million people looking for a place to rent, right? And venture capital gave them the ability to grow that user base on both sides in order to get the critical mass of both sides of the marketplace and get the flywheel spinning. But most of us are not building an Airbnb or an Uber. And so the traditional venture capital model just doesn't make much sense. For one thing, the idea that we're going to have an IPO or get bought by Oracle for $1 billion, there are not that many companies that's a realistic outcome for, right? And owning equity in your startup only does me any good if there's an IPO or an acquisition. Otherwise, why do I want to own 20% of your company? It doesn't do me any good. So the only reason I want to own 20% of your company is with the expectation that it's going to be sold to the public, which is what an IPO is, or sold to somebody else, and then I get 20% of it. And so the vast majority of companies are better off financed in some other way. And there's lots and lots of different sources and structures of capital available. Paul is an expert on all the different sources and structures of capital. Everything from revenue share notes, where it might be, I'm going to loan you the money, and you'll pay me back 2% of your revenue every quarter until the money is paid back, plus some amount of interest. That's a nice, simple way of structuring it because your payments are only based on your revenue. So when you have a great quarter, the fact you got to pay 2% to me doesn't bother you that much because you had a great quarter. And if you had a slow quarter, there's no payments on the note. So that keeps everybody's interests aligned pretty well, right? And I see these things done with something like they're capped at 1.5 times the original investment. So in other words, if I'm loaning you 100 grand, you pay me back 2% of the revenue until I've received 150 back, and then it's done. So that's a pretty good return for me, right? If I put out 100 and got back 150, it's pretty decent. And the fact that I'm now gone is great for you, as opposed to an equity investor that's never gone. I mean, it's been pointed out to pointed out by a whole lot of other people that taking an equity investor is actually much. I try to compare it to marriage. You can get out of a marriage much more easily than you can get out of an equity investment arrangement.
It's a huge effort to write a book. So as an author, what impact do you target? What difference do you hope the book makes?
Well, the first thing was just to get my wife off my back, because she's been, for 2 years, she's been like, why aren't you working on that book you keep talking about?
Is that why you took a picture to tell her?
That's right. So I can go home and show her. You know, so the way I approached this was, so first of all, a lot of the content was stuff that I already had for this course that I've taught for a bunch of years. And then for about 2 years, I regularly wrote articles on Medium with the idea that eventually those would get assembled into a book. And for me, that was a lot easier than just sitting down and trying to write 400 pages. But your question is more about outcomes. I don't know. Actually, I can answer that. I believe passionately in the democratization of entrepreneurship. I believe in the power of entrepreneurship to create opportunity and solve problems all over the world. And so for me, writing this book was kind of my way of helping with that. Yeah.
What do you think about those that are thinking about being entrepreneurs, especially in fields where it's typically not a lot of money? So say K-12 education or being on-premise for first-generation or low-income students.
Yeah.
What do you say to entrepreneurs that are trying to solve problems in those areas where there's
Like Miller Center, right? Yeah. So first of all, I said before, I believe passionately that that entrepreneurship can be the solution to many of these problems. And yeah, it can be hard when you're working in a sector where there is less money available. But it's also true that starting and running a company today costs less money than ever in history, right? I just wrote an article. It's my 2024 trends for the year in the startup world. And one of them is, I said that there's a 5-person unicorn somewhere out there on the horizon, meaning a company worth $1 billion run by 5 people. Because the number of people it takes to run a company today is a fraction of what it once was. Your marketing department today is HubSpot and Canva, right? Your finance department is Xero and QuickBooks and Airtable, right? Your engineering integration department is Zapier. It's these tools that are available today are just remarkably powerful and remarkably cheap. And so that's a huge thing, right? So in other words, I think part of what you have going for you in terms of operating in some place where there isn't as much money available is that you can run an organization for a fraction of the cost of what it's good. And also that there are sources and structures of capital available today that make sense for an operation like that. When I first got involved with Miller Center, one of the big problems with social ventures is that social ventures weren't for-profit enough to pitch venture capitalists, and they weren't non-profit enough to pitch foundations for grants, right? They were neither fish nor fowl. And since that time, the notion of impact capital has become a known asset class, and a lot of different structures of financing that never had been heard of 10, 15 years ago. So, 10, 15 years ago, the idea that I need to raise $20,000, and for $20,000, I think I can really have a big impact on this little area. It never would have happened. Today, it can happen. So, what else? Yeah. Hey.
What advice do you have for students with limited credibility and industry experience?
Get some credibility. Go to credibility.com.
$9.99 a month.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like real life to go out and learn from. It's certainly true that it's true with any career, right? That early in your career you don't have a whole lot of credibility and social capital, and hopefully later in your career you do. And so yeah, so if I'm inferring from what you're saying correctly, it's if you were to pitch an investor, you don't appear to have much credibility. Is that your point? Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's a way you can fix that.
Or you could bring in somebody, a partner that has.
You could get a mentor who can help. You could bring in a partner, right? Get a gray-haired advisor.
Join somebody else and start up.
You could also, if you're a student, you can build your credibility not just by going to classes and having a grade on your class, but by having something on your resume that says, for example, I worked at Miller Center and I did X, Y, and Z.
Just as an example. Yeah.
Get a job at somewhere on campus that does something that will add to your resume. And then you have credibility and you have someone who can give you a recommendation.
One of the most important things to communicate in an investor pitch is, why are you exactly the right entrepreneur for this venture? Because passion ends up being kind of the most important thing, right? That being an entrepreneur is hard. It's hard. There's a lot of bad days. And so if I'm looking at something to invest in, all things equal, what I'm really looking for is just somebody who I think has the passion and tenacity and grit to see this thing through, right? Because none of us know everything there is to know. And the nature of running a startup is that you're going to be encountering things every day that you've never encountered before, right? And so it's the entrepreneurs who have the grit and the perseverance and the tenacity backed by passion that end up being a success. And so, when you're pitching, sorry?
And the ability to learn fast.
Absolutely, right. And so, if you're a pitching investor, pitch your passion, pitch why you are exactly the right entrepreneur for this venture, right? So, if you're working on a device that will help deaf people to hear, and you might want to mention that you had a brother, you grew up with a brother who was deaf, and because of that, you've got tremendous passion about this, right? That get into the pitch. Why are you exactly the right entrepreneur for this venture? Because all an investor is looking for is signals that you have the tenacity and you have the ability to learn on your feet and learn on the fly. That's what an investor cares about. I'll take that any day of the week over somebody with a fancy degree from somewhere but doesn't really have much passion and drive, right? Sahara wants the last word. Wait, what did I say? Okay. Sahan.
Yeah. Why do you think that VC firms are so overhyped right now, and do you think that will change?
Why are VC firms overhyped?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all of my peers, that's their dream job in the business school. They're like, oh, I want to work for a VC firm.
Yeah. Well, it's because they don't realize that venture's a lot of work. It just seems like you're sitting at a fancy desk handing out money all day long. Who wouldn't want to do that? It's actually a very tough business. We're now entering a whole new period in the venture world. I mean, if you've been following the news recently, there've been several venture firms that have had layoffs, which like never happens. But all of a sudden, venture firms are downsizing, and the reason is that they're having trouble raising new funds right now because of the macro climate. That when we're in the ZIRP period, what's the ZIRP period? Who's taking macroeconomics? So ZIRP is zero interest rate policy. So the Federal Reserve Bank of the U.S. Was pursuing kind of a ZIRP policy for the last, for 15 years or so before 2021-ish, and now that's over. And so, if you're a high net worth investor and you're putting some money here, putting some money there, in a zero interest rate environment, venture was a really attractive place to put some of your money because it paid well, whereas sitting in the bank was paying nothing, right? Today, you can get 6 or 7% risk free right now. So all of a sudden, people are less interested in putting money into venture funds. And so, these guys, that's why you see all these layoffs going on right now, is that they're having trouble raising new funds. Yeah. Last question.
Is there any way that you could get access to the slides, the slides that you use?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Yep, no problem. And to think about how are we going to do this? Does anybody have a birthday today?
Sunday.
Close enough. If I can find it. All right. Happy birthday. All right, Karen, how should we do the other one?